All right, you already know why you're here, so let's just go. Number 33, Nepenthes. I'm sorry, is this even a boss? Should I even be counting this as a boss? This whole mission was just to destroy a generator. What's the point of having bosses at all then, if you're just gonna give a health bar to everything that vaguely resembles a fridge? Once you've descended about halfway, it starts launching seeker missiles at you that feel really awkward to dodge just because looking straight down usually means the view is getting obscured by one of your oversized shoulder-mounted toasters. I've considered myself an expert at blowing up generators by this point, so if you're suddenly gonna slap a health bar on one, I expect that motherfucker to start growing legs. I'm still not 100% confident listing this boss with other bosses is even an honest comparison to make, because it falls so far below the game standard that I'm starting to think the 2-mile descent downward to reach it was an intentional metaphor. Number 32, Defung Student Pilot. This fight is straight up murder. You're given a mission that involves you intercepting an enemy armored core mid-delivery, only to find out it's being delivered by a student pilot that has zero hope of ever coming close to matching what you can throw at him. He's so hopeless that when left alive for more than like 15 seconds, he begins falling victim to his own delusions of grandeur, and he'll dodge like one missile and be like, wow, I can't believe I'm keeping up with the real pilot, right before headbutting the next 57 and subsequently losing half his health bar. I thought I was locked onto one of the fucking cargo crates because of how well hidden this guy was at the mission start. I actually had to replay the mission multiple times over just to make sure I had enough B-roll to cover the length of this section, because the fight just keeps ending too quickly. Number 31, the Heavy Warship. I grew to recognize a convenient resupply point usually being a strong indication that something really big wanted to kick the shit out of me here in about 20 seconds. So it actually took me by surprise when that didn't happen. All things considered, it does have a really strong build-up where it tricks you into thinking you're just fighting more dudes and continuing on with the mission, when a rain of lasers suddenly cooks everything on the screen, leading you into just fighting more dudes and continuing on with the mission. But they're blue this time, so it's different. Eventually, you fight through all the PCA soldiers, at which point the warship just gives up and says, here you go, you won. Here's my giant glowing forehead. One rocket, please. Number 30, Swinburne. Swinburne is basically an AC boss with a build made entirely of weapons you've already seen before, and made a conscious effort to avoid because of how remarkably shit they were. Rushing you with his stun baton almost always results in him losing the exchange as long as you have a decent stagger weapon like a shotgun, and if he ever begins a combo, he fully intends on finishing it. Yeah, beat that empty air, Swinburne. Beat the shit out of it. This opens a pretty large window of time where you can punish him really easily. There was actually a point in the fight where he tried to stop and ask me questions, like we were on a date or some shit. I was kind of curious what would happen if I just left him alone and let him talk, but I accidentally shot him while he was in the middle of his monologue, and whatever side quest that dialogue tree led to just went up in flames before my eyes, so I just killed him and assumed I did a good thing. He was annoying anyways. Number 29, Nozak. Well, some respect is in order for hiding this boss somewhere far off the traveled path at least. You encounter Nozak in the mission where you infiltrate Grid 86. I don't think most people even know this boss exists because I found it by complete accident looking up chest locations to beef up my wardrobe. Nozak covers an impressively wide spectrum of bad. His entire character is based around wanting to get rich quick, which is apparently the whole reason he even came to Rubicon. He's ranked 26th in the arena, canonically making him a massive pushover. He's a stripped down, money-grubbing 10-car pile-up of a boss that I have no respect for, if only for the reason that he thinks this chest is his just because he saw it first. Oh, and he packs all the firepower of a speed bump in a Kroger parking lot. I actually don't think he fired his right-hand weapon at me a single time. Number 28, Invincible Rummy. In contrast to a lot of the other AC bosses, those from the RAD faction actually feel somewhat unique. Every single game with a sci-fi concept always has that one faction that somehow manages to get by just by making their equipment out of obsolete kitchen appliances. I'm surprised they didn't have a stereotypical Southern American accent to match. Invincible Rummy is ranked dead last in the arena, and the fact that I had the chance to fight him in the arena to begin with kind of tarnished what little surprise this fight would have otherwise had. It's hard to say what's even unique about this fight. It's just another AC boss, just a dude piloting a mech he made with old computer parts and recycled microwaves. One thing I did kinda learn very quickly was that the mini AC bosses are kinda the game's way of showing you what potential builds will look like for you in the future, which is why I feel like the only reason this boss even exists is to let the player know that at some point you will be able to attach a chainsaw to your arm. Number 27, Honest Brute. This guy is a fucking psychopath. I couldn't tell what his build was half the time because of all the flames obscuring my vision, so I still don't quite know what this fight was. I just know it was a joke. His so-called psychotic personality is actually just him mumbling phrases that sound vaguely reminiscent of E.E. Cummings poetry if you don't think about it for more than 2 seconds. I'm honestly not even sure how practical a flamethrower would be in this kind of environment. I saw online that people tend to recommend against close quarters loadouts, but my dual laser shotgun setup seemed to mulch him in under a minute. At least the game is aware of how he comes across, but it does so in a way that almost makes me pity the poor guy. He can barely even finish what he thinks is a sentence without Carla jumping into the comms and telling him to headbutt a table saw. Number 26, G1 Michigan. Quick disclaimer before I actually criticize this cornball of an army general. Michigan is one of my favorite characters in the game. His constant Arlie Ermy energy makes me feel like I'm playing a sci-fi adaptation of Full Metal Jacket. He'll take the piss out of you if you don't bring the stun needle to the ice worm fight, and I bet he pretends to be a personal trainer on Instagram. I know everything about this guy's life story just by the tone of his voice. Also, I don't know if we're going by like Organization 13 rules or whatever, but I'm pretty sure a person with the title of G1 is canonically the strongest of the Red Guns. Like, that's the whole point. I'm not asking why he needs 57 waves of troops to roll out the red carpet for him. That part makes sense. I'm asking why he's supposed to be the strongest, yet on all 3 times I replayed this mission for footage, I'm pretty sure I just killed him by accident because I thought I was aiming at one of his goons. Number 25, Nightfall Raven. At long last, you finally found the guy you stole your call sign from, and after having arrived just in time to catch him wiping out an entire PCA fleet by himself, you'd think he could put up a bit more of a fight. This whole encounter was just disappointing. When the cutscene established that this was the pilot I stole the call sign from, I half expected to buckle in to get my ass kicked for the next 30 minutes, because that's how these fights usually go, but the fight lasted just barely over a minute. I saw him holding a pile bunker in his cutscene, and I don't think he got the chance to even use it. Walking in on someone just dominating the shit out of the same villain you've been rightfully fearing for the past 10 hours of the game at this point builds a shitload of momentum, only for it all to just be thrown away when you realize their AC is basically just an old clunky dishwasher with a stick that goes boom. Number 24, Strider. I have no clue where to even rank this thing. It's one of the bosses that disguises itself as a series of non-interesting platforming challenges that feel designed to extend the length of the fight more than anything else, but the build-up that comes with racing towards it as it begins shooting barely dodgeable plasma beams at you, Radon style, does a really good job emphasizing the scale of what you're up against. I was preparing myself for something out of Nier Automata or some shit, but once I blast its leg apart and the game sucker punches me with the good old destroy 4 of something to continue objective, I kind of felt scammed, if I'm being honest. The big glowing eyeball was a really nice touch, but I feel like it takes away a lot of the threat if whatever it throws at you can be hard countered by hiding behind something. When you take down the shield, the eye starts billowing smoke and you hear one of the enemy soldiers say something akin to, "Oh no, it's weak now. I sure hope it doesn't get attacked again." And I understandably took that as a cue to blindly rush at it with all the piss and vinegar I had in my body, which led to me almost getting one-tapped from full HP by a surprise missile salvo at the very last second. What the fuck, Fromsoft? I was expecting the boss to encourage closer engagement for me to finish it off, but apparently all it wants you to do is play peekaboo with it from a distance until it dies, which just kind of felt anticlimactic. It was at this point where I discovered how thrillingly stupid dual shotgun builds were and proceeded to mow through half the mid-game bosses like wet paper. So any AC boss I personally felt was uneventful to the point of me not even remembering what weapons they were using or killed over before the dialogue exchange could even finish are all going to be placed here. This includes fights like Sulla, Little Zilli, Rokumonsen, like 5 of Iguazu's different encounters, and most of the AC duo fights that just ended up feeling unremarkable. I had to revisit the arena and go down the roster just to remember some of the names of whoever I fought. I had the Mater Link and Wu Huahai duo fight all wrapped up before they could finish trauma dumping about what a throbbing dick Snail was, and Hawkins and Pater just felt like the game reminding you what a badass you are by making one of them piss their pants. Maybe it's just because I don't feel like some characters were given a proper amount of spotlight or whatever, but if the fight ends so quickly I almost miss the health bar appearing at the top of the screen, I'm just going to assume your death meant nothing. Number 22, Snail. Snail doesn't give a shit, and you shouldn't give a shit about him either. Snail is the byproduct of upper middle class parents coping with the fact that they've amounted to nothing. So they send him to college thinking he'll become a scientist, but instead he just spends his 20s selling phones. And that Sally Mae loan will be old enough to take a fucking driver's exam by the time it's paid off. Fuck Snail, I hate this guy. I hate his snobby attitude. I hate that the game makes me fight a shitty AC version of this boss before giving me the actual boss like 3 missions later that I wouldn't have even known about had I not went for a specific ending. Snail is the kind of guy that spent 5 years being insecure over the fact that he couldn't grow a goddamn beard past the tip of his chin. He's the guy that spills his drink everywhere he goes and somehow makes it feel like it was your fault. If you're wondering why I haven't said a word about the actual fight yet, that's because I don't remember it. NFT peddling fuck. Number 21, Ekdramoy. I'm starting to think we may have bullied Fromsoft a bit too hard on the whole dual bosses conundrum. I don't think there exists an easier boss fight in the entire game except maybe the student pilot. I do like the idea of being pinned against two special forces ACs with different loadouts that force you to play a certain way around each one of them, but if the only thing I remember about the fight by the time it's over is one of them had a cool laser cannon, then I think you could afford to throw these guys a few buffs. All I had to do was throw in a quick dodge in between firing weapons, and I managed to pretty consistently avoid whatever the other guy was throwing at me without putting too much thought into it. Maybe by this time my loadout was too overpowered without me realizing it, but my build couldn't have made less sense if you install the fucking weather vane on the top of my head, and this fight still barely took a minute long. Number 20, Light Cavalry Pater. I'm willing to give Light Cavalry Pater a little credit just because, unlike most Light Cavalry, Pater actually does a pretty great job at keeping away from you and throwing chip damage at you. That's obviously the point of the other Light Cavalry units in the game, but most of them aren't very good at it. Most of them shit their pants when they see a laser lance, but when Pater somehow managed to avoid half my charges, I felt like I should at least give him a high five or something. Otherwise, it's just another LC. Number 19, Handler Walter. Despite ranking Walter somewhere in the middle of the list, I only have one major criticism for this fight, which is the fact that it just ends way too early. I feel like a fight like this needed to have some level of absurdity to it, and I got none of that. He teases the idea of succumbing to the Coral's influence, losing chunks of his memory by the second, and it's very obvious the Corpos did some shady shit to Walter when he was captured at the beginning of the final chapter. I don't need this much open space just to disable two engines. I know what I was being reeled into, but the reveal, I guess, was still pretty cool. The glowing shark fin looking head on a brand new Ibis Series AC and the full coral weaponry gave Walter a sense of unfuckwithability I was expecting to carry over into the fight. What I didn't expect was for double stun needles to actually melt his ass that quickly. Number 18, Sea Spider. I'm starting to think I'm just not playing the game correctly. I'm having trouble with absolute pushover bosses. I got my shit kicked in by E-rankers at the arena, but bosses like the Sea Spider took me no more than 2 tries, and that was only because I started with a build that had me quick boosting with the speed of someone rolling down the stairs. It has a pretty debilitating weakness against explosive weaponry, and the only thing I was missing at the time were the quad legs, which are supposed to help with vertical ascent. I felt like the boss could have been a bit less bullet spongy, but that's mostly mitigated by the fact that you can just hover 10 feet off the ground and be out of the way of almost everything it throws at you. A missile-based loadout guarantees an ACS strain every 15 to 20 seconds, so a good missile build can just flat out immobilize it if you know what you're doing. The transition into the second phase is kinda neat. It shows you its best impression of a satellite before throwing the exact same attacks at you that it's been throwing at you for the past 2 minutes. There is this one really cool Beyblade attack that can two-shot you if you're hovering too low and not paying attention, but it has a telegraph that would only be more effective if it pressed the thrust button for you, so again, nothing to worry about. Number 17, the Juggernaut. I'm trying to decide why I thought the Juggernaut was a cool fight. It was one of the first bosses to tease the idea of having a glaringly obvious weak point, but if anything, I kind of felt like it was too obvious. I think most people immediately understood what they were supposed to do as soon as they saw the giant shield. Having Rusty with you makes the first half easy, almost to the point of being dull. But not only does the boss get noticeably more aggressive, Rusty remembers he forgot to pick up his shampoo at the grocery store or some shit and just takes off halfway through the fight, leaving you without supporting fire that, as it turns out, was really fucking helpful. The transition into the second phase felt unique enough. The landmines were annoying, but all that really means is they did their job, and it provides a reasonable enough challenge that teaches you how to treat encounters on the road ahead. Like not letting the boss knee drop your shit through a wall in the first 2 seconds because you were checking your Discord. Number 16, the AH-12 helicopter. Fromsoft has an ongoing tradition of their opening boss being significantly harder than the first 30% of the game for some reason, so there wasn't too much room for surprises here. It's a simple boss fight with 2 phases. The second phase essentially just paring down to firing twice as many weapons at you with slightly more intense music. It is good. It is exactly as good as it should be. It forces an understanding of the game's mechanics without beating you over the head with them, and if you died to something, you usually know what you did to cause it. Eventually, you figure out that spam dodging away from every missile on the screen is an impossible ask, and those conveniently placed empty buildings behind you suddenly start making a lot more sense. By the time you've reached the 3rd chapter and get intercepted by a second one, it feels manageable to the point of being a joke. Even Walter can't resist pulling out the whole "look how far you've come" line with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Number 15, Ephemera. Ephemera as a boss by itself is nothing too special, save the fact that the AC uses the Fromsoft patented Moonlight weapon, which gives it an automatic C tier at the very least. And guess what? That's the best it's getting, because the only discrepancy between this fight and any other AC is the imminent anxiety of a number going down. And apparently that was enough to trick my bowling ball ass brain into making extremely dumb mistakes until I finally just said fuck this and switched to dual shotties and took care of it in like 20 seconds. By this point in the game, this will have happened pretty frequently. Most standard ACs are hard countered by the simple method of giving your balls a tug, which leads to a lot of these fights having barely any screen time if your build is halfway competent. Number 14, Melania Blade of Ibis. I am like most of you. I blasted through a good 15 to 20 attempts on my first playthrough, capturing clip after clip of me aimlessly shitting missiles into empty air for 3 minutes. But when I started seeing videos of the Montana-sized dump the laser lance pile bunker combo took on this boss's health bar, I honestly refused to believe it and wanted to go into the game to test it myself, and then finished it off in less than a minute. The only way to fight the CEL 240 is to just not give a shit about your life. Take any instincts of self-preservation you have and flush them. It's a good fight, all things considered. It punishes passivity, it leaves open enough attack windows to not feel like the fight is hopeless. The music theme is probably my favorite boss soundtrack in the whole game because of how brutally honest the first couple notes are. I'm not musically talented enough to describe the effect, but when you hear the heavy impact of you know you're gonna be here for a while. Number 13, Carla and Chatty Stick. In a 2v1, the biggest asset you have is team chemistry, and I loathe how tremendously great these two are at playing off of each other. Chatty spends all of his time hanging out around the upper lip of the arena throwing poise-breaking shit at you, and Carla somehow knows just when to swoop in and capitalize on it. Inversely, going full aggro on Carla leaves you open to your poise being chewed up by a surprisingly accurate Chatty. You cannot afford to ignore either AC for more than like 2 seconds at a time. Still not sure why most of the Dozer ACs are named after stages of a meal. I'm not exactly a fan of getting the shit kicked out of me while Carla is reciting one-liner she heard in a 70s movie. I'm gonna give you a full-course meal. Okay, I'm sorry. Are we fighting, or are you auditioning for a voice role in Metal Gear Rising? Number 12, the Enforcer. The Enforcer doesn't have many weaknesses. It's a boss you find in the middle of Chapter 4, and it does everything it can to prep you for the road ahead by really testing how much you've learned about the dance. Every game with a fast and complicated combat loop has a dance of some kind. Doom Eternal has it, Devil May Cry has it, and so does Armored Core 6. These games also have bosses that I call dance partners, like the Marauder, Virgil, and the Enforcer, respectively. Bosses that exist entirely to test your knowledge of the game. How to dodge, how to punish, how to pace an attrition war, just everything. It's one of the game's only true all-rounders, a straight-up brick wall of a fight that you can only get past by just being better than he is, and those are encounters I've always appreciated. Number 11, the Smart Cleaner. Most of my love for this boss comes from a visual design that really emphasizes the RAD's tendency to judge the combat efficiency of an AC by how many belt sanders they can attach to it. It's also an example of how repeat encounters can still be exciting, in my opinion. You only fight a total of 2 of these, to my knowledge, in the whole game. The first battle is a classic 1v1 that teaches you the value of playing chicken with a boss's business in to deal damage, setting you up nicely for the Cataphract boss fight a few missions later, and the second encounter allows you to take a more lax approach while Rusty is busy pulling aggro. I've always been of the idea that repeat bosses can still be fun as long as you're putting those bosses in different environments that require different strategies. And only giving us 2 of them also helps. That definitely helps. Number 10, PCA Light and Heavy Cavalry. Consider this a rematch of the Ekdremoy duo fight, and in almost every way a better fight in general. There's a few differences that make this fight much more enjoyable. The heavy and light cavalry units are notably better at playing off of each other than the Ekdremoy. The light unit tends to be much more evasive and annoying to deal with, while the heavy unit is constantly in your face trying to headbutt your teeth through your ass. Secondly, the game is generous enough to give you a buddy, but if you don't watch his back, his AC actually gets damaged and he exits the fight preemptively because your selfish ass let him take too much of the aggro, leaving you in a really uncomfortable 2v1. The fact that this could even happen took me so much by surprise because generally I expect NPC allies to just have God mode on so they can stay in the fight indefinitely. I don't know. But good old Rusty here is actually pretty limited in what he can do and needs you to draw some of the aggro if you actually want him to stay in the fight. This almost always means prioritizing the heavy unit and making sure he dies first, because whichever unit you go after at the start usually means the other one will start attacking Rusty. Number 9, Volta and Iguazu. There are so many avenues you can take to killing these two that it's kind of impressive. Firstly, neither of them are aggroed until you make it clear that you feel like playing dirty, which gives you a very valuable choice on how you want the fight to begin. I usually went for Iguazu first because Volta's tank build is close to unbeatable when you play into its strengths, but if a 2v1 sounds unfair this early into the game, you can also fly over to the Tetrapod mini-boss and have it pull some of the aggro off of you. One thing to note is that there is now an ocean of MTs around you that saw the stunt you just pulled and are now on your side. But if you ignore them, they'll just sit there pissing circles in the snow and doing nothing. But if you just feel like raw dogging it and taking the 2v1, there's plenty of map geometry, buildings, and dams you can use for cover. It's an extremely hard fight if you take it this early, but a lot of that is offset by the game giving you such a large web of options to mitigate all their firepower. Number 8, Arquebus Balteus. The second Balteus fight is a Morgott-style rematch. You both have learned some new moves, you've picked up some new gadgets along the journey, and now it's finally time to show PH Dick where he can shove it. Get him down to half health and he activates apeshit mode and starts vomiting plasma beams to the point where it's actually difficult to even look at the screen sometimes. This is where I realized what a solid job the voice actor did making Snail as unlikable as possible, making it only that much more satisfying when he spends his final breath talking about how he is Arquebus personified before his death scream blows out his Blue Yeti mic. Could do without Rusty's encouragement on the comms sometimes because it only feels demoralizing when he's telling me how capable and strong I am when a plasma beam is getting shoved up my ass, but I'm just nitpicking at this point. Number 7, King, Chartreuse, and Raven. King and Chartreuse are two of the most skilled pilots, evidenced by their placement in the arena. And this is one instance where I would actually recommend doing the arena fights beforehand because the knowledge of how they fight is your biggest strength. After a fixed amount of time has passed, Raven's original pilot swoops in with an AC of their own and you're like, oh, finally, this shit was getting tense. Now it's a fair fight. All right, let's go. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that's fair. No, that's totally fair. Fuck, don't feign remorse with me, King. You knew what this shit was. If you bring a laser lance, you can pretty consistently focus one of them down before Raven even shows up, and doing so gives you much more breathing room in an already suffocating fight. I just love the sheer relief, the feeling of a burden lifted that I know everyone felt when Raven swooped in to supposedly help us, and then having all that relief stomped on when the upper border of the screen grows a third health bar. That might be one of the best plot twists Fromsoft has ever thrown at me. Number 6, Balteus. I have a generally pessimistic view towards bosses like this. I think hard skill checks in games like these are necessary because I'd rather be tested on my knowledge of how my character works instead of piling through 12 iterations of what's mechanically the same exact boss encounter just with a slightly different build. But I think this is where Balteus is vastly misunderstood. He's not really a skill check. Well, I mean he is, but not to the extent people think so. He's more just there to remind you that not every build works with every enemy. Go ahead and replay the mission with dual sonic cannons and that shield of his might as well be made of sawdust. Most of us are familiar with the nasty habit From has when it comes to going complete scorched earth sledgehammer mode on shit that doesn't deserve it. So just please, at least try this build before we come to an agreement about a boss being too hard. I don't want to be stuck with a future version of the game where Balteus ends the fight early and treats me to a fucking ice cream sundae. I remember what they did to Radon, okay? I was there for that shit. Number 5, Air. The piano really didn't need to go this hard, but I'm eternally grateful that it did. The bad ending, or the Fires of Raven ending, concludes with Air realizing your success means the end of Rubicon, and therefore the end of everything she loves. And she doesn't like that, so she goes off and takes control of an Ibis Series AC that's 20 times cooler than Walter's, and even has the courtesy to stay on comms with you the whole time just so she can let you know she's waiting on your ass. It isn't the toughest fight in the world, at least not compared to other endgame battles, but all the missile spam starts getting a little blurry when you're trying to look at the screen through your tears. The speed of the fight can feel a little overwhelming if you're seeing it for the first time, but what sucks is she's Coral, so going back and forth between tasering her and cow prodding her with a giant laser is enough to end the fight pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. Number 4, All Mind Iguazu. This beginning sequence of this fight honestly gave me a good laugh. Poor Iguazu just can't take no for an answer. He's the butt of every single joke. He gets constantly bullied by Raven through the whole game to the point where he eventually just shows up whenever he feels like it for a rematch. Imagine if you found out there was only one Crucible Knight in Elden Ring and he's just really shitty at fighting, but constantly finds ways to run into you like 16 different times throughout the game to keep having rematches with you. That's Iguazu. Iguazu is the dude that quits out out of the lobby right at the end of the match, because something about his ego can't stand being confronted with his own lack of skill presented in flashing bold text in front of his fucking face. I'm sure it has absolutely nothing to do with all of his friends being killed because of the combat data I spent hours personally hand delivering to All Mind, and I'm not even sure why you would insinuate that. I'm also not sure why you needed all that combat data to begin with. I only ever ran dual shotguns in the arena, so it's not like I came with that many surprises. But in this ending, the Ibis AC Air uses to fight you in the bad ending is now here to provide support fire. And she's actually a damn good pilot too. Like, she actually helps. Number 3, Rusty. When I got a message from my editor telling me I was in the game and had one of the coolest fights, I immediately started thinking about how I could put this boss in the top 5 without it reeking of narcissism. And at long last, I just kinda decided to own it. Rusty either helps you or tries to kick the shit out of you at the penultimate mission, depending on which ending you're going for. Combat-wise, he's pretty easily counterable since most of his arsenal contains kinetic weaponry, but you know those occasional moments of dialogue where you hear them and you're like, that's the line I'd begin my boss fight with if I had one? Yeah, Rusty has a lot of those. The simple moniker of Buddy was a genius choice of writing, because even in real-life situations, being called Buddy can either be a comfort or an invitation to come and die, depending on how it's used. I guess not a lot can be said about the fights themselves, but his character arc is so cool that I honestly don't mind. Number 2, the Cataphract. The Cataphract is something I've been calling a jump scare boss. No build-up, no rising action or time to mentally prepare yourself, no cool cutscene that introduces the boss before fading out. Nope, you're just dropped in the middle of a snowfield somewhere and a station wagon the size of a jet engine comes and body slams your tits off. This is a brilliant fight because the weakness it has is really nothing new. It has a vulnerable front side that's conveniently where most of its firepower is, so you have seen this before, but it spends nearly all of its downtime reorienting itself to face away from you. So your best way to do any meaningful damage is to catch it when it's literally charging at you. This is a game of chicken that only gets easier once you realize it's an exchange you're pretty much guaranteed to win. The Cataphract addresses you as Raven, mistaking you for the pilot who had that call sign before you, and it isn't until the final phase of the fight when someone realizes your combat style doesn't match the real Raven and subsequently shits their pants, which I think is a really creative way to build some curiosity around whoever Raven was and whatever shady shit they were into. Number 1, the Ice Worm. Here it is. Here's the Storm Ruler fight. Everyone, Yorm the Divine, worm of blasphemy. If we're ranking bosses solely on cool factor, then it's easy to see why the Ice Worm is probably going to top almost everyone's list. But I like to think my reasoning for doing so is a bit different. I love the tension it builds. I love how everyone's AC gets compromised right as the Ice Worm is about to die and leaves you and Rusty to fight it by yourselves. I love how the final phase takes 2 needles instead of 1 because the worm is actually figuring out how to strengthen itself against your attacks. I obviously love the fucking I won't miss. Yeah, that. None of that has anything to do with why the worm is in first place for me. This boss is king because the one time I decided to just, not bring the needle, just leave that shit on the coffee table on my way to work. Not only is that not a fail condition, but Michigan even acknowledges you don't have it and proceeds to ream you over how intelligently destitute you are as a player. Even Air just sighs in disappointment like, wow, I am attached to this fucking donkey of a person. I don't think anything happens if you win without the needle, but the fact that the mission just continues as normal without it is an exemplary display of fan awareness, because some gigaturd out there is gonna upload himself killing it in 20 seconds with a paperclip and a slingshot.